All right, let's unpack this. Remember all those jokes about the Banana Republic? Well, get ready for the Potato Republic. You sent us a bunch of articles and Reddit posts about this alleged price fixing going on in the frozen potato market. And honestly, it is fascinating. We've got major players like McCain and Cavendish being slapped with lawsuits in the US for allegedly colluding to jack up prices. It's wild.
What's fascinating here is that we're not just talking about any food, we're talking about a staple. Potatoes are in everything.
Yeah,
And if this alleged cartel is real, it's impacting how much people are paying for a basic part of their diet.
exactly. These aren't some small time players either. We're talking Canadian giants.
And that's where those Reddit threads you sent get really interesting. People are noticing things disappearing from grocery store shelves here in Canada,
Yeah.
and they're connecting the dots back to these lawsuits and this alleged price fixing scheme.
Okay, so let's break down what we know from the lawsuits. These companies, McCain, Cavendish, Lamb Weston, and J.R. Simplot, they're being called the Big Four because they control a whopping 98% of the frozen potato market. That's like almost total domination. And the lawsuits claim they've been coordinating price increases for years, even when their own costs were going down.
That's a huge red flag. When you see that kind of market concentration, it raises serious concerns about anti-competitive behavior. In a truly competitive market, you'd expect to see companies battling it out for customers, not working together to keep prices high.
And the thing is, people are seeing this play out in their own kitchens. One Redditor even claims a Cavendish rep straight up told them they wouldn't play the Loblaws price game. Like, whoa, are they implying they refuse to lower their prices for a major grocery chain?
It definitely suggests there was pushback against any attempts to lower prices, which
Mm.
we're looking at the bigger picture here, could mean that some major grocery chains were possibly aware of this alleged scheme.
And we're not talking about small price bumps either. We're talking a 47% jump in frozen potato product prices between July 2022 and July 2024. That's insane.
It's hard to ignore a price increase like that, especially for something as basic as potatoes. It really starts to impact people's budgets, especially when you consider how many different foods rely on potatoes as an ingredient.
Now, of course, we have to acknowledge that these are just allegations right now. The companies deny any wrongdoing, and the lawsuits haven't been decided yet.
Right. It's important to let the legal process play out. But even if the allegations aren't proven in court, the fact that they've been made and that we're seeing these kinds of price jumps is a big deal.
Especially when you see how passionate people are getting about it online. Like
Hmm.
these Reddit threads are filled with people sharing their experiences, theories, and even personal anecdotes that seem to back up the claims in the lawsuits.
Absolutely. It really shows how much this is impacting people's lives. Let's dive into some of those Reddit posts you mentioned. One user, Firefighter82, noticed that store brand fries like No Frills and Our Compliments vanished around 2022, right when those alleged price hikes started.
And they're not the only one. Another user, the Honey Badger, claims they spoke directly to a vendor rep from Cavendish who said they refused to play the Loblaws price game. So now we have two separate accounts suggesting that something fishy might be going on between these big potato companies and major grocery chains.
Right. And that's where it gets really interesting. If the grocery chains were somehow complicit in this alleged scheme, it adds a whole other layer to this story. Are we talking about a conspiracy that goes beyond just the potato processors themselves?
Okay, hold on. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. It's important to remember that not everyone on Reddit is buying into this whole potato cartel theory. We have users like Adrian and Bisset who offer a different perspective. They claim their family works for J.D. Irving, the parent company of Cavendish, and that the disappearance of store brand fries was actually due to production capacity issues, not collusion.
That's a fair point. It's important to consider all sides of the story. Maybe Cavendish simply couldn't meet the demand for both their own brand and store brands, so they prioritized their own more profitable products. It's a valid counterargument.
So we've got these conflicting accounts, passionate Reddit users, and a whole lot of questions. But what's the hard evidence? Is there anything concrete in those lawsuits to back up these claims of a potato cartel?
Well, the lawsuits cite several pieces of evidence. First, they point to that incredibly high level of market concentration we talked about earlier. The fact that the Big Four control almost the entire market creates an environment where collusion can thrive.
They also claim these companies engaged in lockstep price increases, meaning they all raise their prices at the same time and by similar amounts.
Huh?
That's pretty suspicious, right?
It is. In a normal competitive market, you'd expect to see some variation in pricing. Some companies trying to undercut each other to attract customers. This synchronized price hiking is a classic sign of potential price fixing.
And there's more. The lawsuits allege that these companies were sharing confidential information about pricing and production, which would give them an unfair advantage in coordinating their actions. It's like they were all working from the same playbook.
And there's some evidence to support that claim. One of the lawsuits cites internal company documents that supposedly show executives discussing pricing strategies and market share. So while we can't say for sure what was happening behind closed doors, it definitely looks suspicious.
So it sounds like there's at least some evidence to suggest that something fishy might be going on in the world of frozen potatoes. But as you said earlier, we need to let the legal process play out before jumping to conclusions.
Exactly. The companies involved are denying any wrongdoing, and they're fighting these lawsuits tooth and nail. They argue that any communication about pricing was purely coincidental, and that the price increases were justified by market factors, like increased transportation costs.
It's fascinating, isn't it? We have these two competing narratives, one alleging a deliberate scheme to manipulate the market, and the other claiming it's all just a big misunderstanding. And it's up to the courts to decide which narrative is more credible.
Absolutely. But regardless of the outcome, this case raises some really important questions about the power of big corporations, the effectiveness of antitrust laws, and ultimately the impact on everyday consumers.
Speaking of consumers, let's go back to that Reddit thread and see what other insights we can glean from those online discussions. They're a goldmine of information, and sometimes even more entertaining than the legal documents.
I agree. Those real-world observations are invaluable. Let's see what those potato detectives have uncovered. One user, Holguess 6364, claims that Cavendish completely pulled out of private label production in Canada back in 2023.
Which, if you think about it, would definitely support the claim that they were prioritizing their own brand over store brands, even if it meant those store brands disappeared entirely. And that's not the only interesting tidbit. Another user, Arm Syntherm, has a theory about Loblaw's involvement in all of this.
Oh, this is a good one. They noticed that no-name frozen French fries vanished from Loblaw's stores earlier this year. But then a few weeks later, Loblaw started selling Naturally Imperfect, no-name potatoes in 10-pound bags at a discount.
And they're speculating that this was Loblaw's way of clearing out their fried potato stock after they pulled their own brand fries from the shelves, maybe to make room for more expensive name brand fries.
It's a provocative theory, and it definitely highlights the complex relationship between food processors and retailers. Were they working together, intentionally or unintentionally, to drive up prices? It's a question worth exploring.
But again, we need more evidence before jumping to any conclusions about Loblaw's involvement. Still, it's all very intriguing. This whole situation is raising a lot of questions about transparency in the food industry.
It really is. Consumers deserve to know how the food they're buying is priced, and whether there are any shady practices at play. It's about trust and fairness.
Well said. Let's take a moment to digest all of this information about alleged potato cartels, Reddit sleuths, and corporate intrigue. When we come back, we'll delve deeper into the potential consequences of all of this and what it could mean for the future of the food industry.
I'm eager to explore those implications. This is far from just a potato-sized problem. It speaks to larger issues within our food system.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of potato price fixing. Before we take a moment to process all the information, we were talking about how this alleged scheme impacts consumers and the lack of transparency in the food industry.
Right, and it's got me thinking, what happens if these companies are actually found guilty? What are the consequences of messing with our spuds?
Well, in the U.S., the penalties for price fixing can be pretty hefty. We're talking massive fines and even jail time for executives involved.
Jail time for potatoes. That seems extreme. It might sound extreme, but it shows how seriously regulators take this kind of manipulation. Price fixing really undermines the whole idea of a free market economy. It hurts competition, stifles innovation, and ultimately leaves consumers with fewer choices and higher prices.
And what about here in Canada? Are the penalties similar?
They're generally less severe than in the US, but the Competition Bureau here has been cracking down on anti-competitive behavior, and they have the power to impose fines and other sanctions. So while a CEO might not end up behind bars for potato price fixing here, it's definitely not something they can just brush off.
So there are real consequences, even if they're not as dramatic as jail time. But beyond the legal stuff, there's also the whole court public opinion to consider. And people are already outraged about this on Reddit. Imagine what will happen if these companies are actually found guilty.
Exactly. The reputational damage could be huge. Consumers have a lot more power these days thanks to social media. A boycott could gain traction quickly and have a serious impact on a company's bottom line. These companies have a lot to lose if they're seen as exploiting consumers for profit, especially when it comes to something as basic as potatoes.
And it makes you wonder if this is just the tip of the iceberg. If it's happening with potatoes, could it be happening with other foods too? I mean, haven't we seen similar scandals in the past?
You're absolutely right to be concerned. This case highlights a broader trend of consolidation in the food industry. We're seeing fewer and fewer companies controlling more and more of the food supply. And that kind of concentration of power can create an environment ripe for anti-competitive behavior.
Like, remember the bread price fixing scandal a few years back? That was huge.
Exactly. And it's not just bread and potatoes. We're seeing this trend across the food industry, from meat packing to dairy to produce. When a handful of companies dominate a market, it can stifle competition and innovation, leading to higher prices and less choice for consumers.
And when it comes to food, that's particularly concerning. It's not like people can just decide to stop eating if prices get too high. Food is a necessity, not a luxury.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to have strong antitrust laws and proactive enforcement. We need to protect consumers from price manipulation and ensure a fair and competitive marketplace, especially when it comes to something as essential as food.
This whole potato situation is a wake-up call, isn't it? It's a reminder that we need to be paying attention to what's happening in the food industry and demanding more transparency and accountability from these powerful companies.
I agree. It's a reminder that we can't take things for granted. Consumers have power, but we need to be informed and engaged to use that power effectively.
Speaking of informed and engaged, let's head back to that Reddit thread and see what people are saying about the potential impact of this case.
Yeah.
And what they think should be done about it. They're often ahead of the curve when it comes to spotting these kinds of issues.
You're right. Those online discussions can be a real barometer of public sentiment. Let's dive back in and see what those digital potato warriors are up to. One user, Jim John Jim, says that anyone who lives in Atlanta, Canada has known about this. McCain plus Irving Cavendish plus Sobeys Empire alleged cartel for decades.
That's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah.
If true, it suggests that this isn't some new phenomenon that's been going on for years, possibly right under our noses.
And it highlights the fact that these concerns about anti-competitive behavior aren't just coming from a few disgruntled Redditors. They're deeply rooted in communities that have been directly impacted by the actions of these companies.
Another user, Sufficient Bid 1279,
Yeah.
brings up an interesting point about the illusion of choice in the grocery store. They argue that even when we see shelves stocked with different brands, if those brands are ultimately controlled by a small handful of companies, are we truly getting real choice?
It's a thought-provoking question. Do we have the level of variety and competition that we think we have? Or are we being subtly manipulated by these large corporations?
And then we have user Jason Stackhouse 111, who's calling for more government regulation of the food industry, arguing that food is an essential service and should be treated as such. They want to see every step of the food supply chain closely regulated to ensure fair pricing and access for everyone.
That's a strong stance, and it reflects a growing sentiment that the free market alone isn't sufficient to protect consumers when it comes to essential goods like food.
So there's a lot of anger and frustration out there. People are feeling the pinch of rising food costs, and they're looking for solutions.
Absolutely. And it's not just about potatoes. It's about the entire food system and whether it's serving the needs of people or the profits of corporations.
So let's talk solutions. What can be done to address these concerns about consolidation and anti-competitive behavior in the food industry? Is there any hope for our fries? So we've journeyed deep into the world of frozen spuds, uncovered allegations of price fixing, and explored the complex power dynamics of the food industry. What have we learned? And what does it all mean for us fry-loving folks?
Well, this deep dive has really highlighted the importance of being informed and engaged consumers. We can't just passively accept what we see on grocery store shelves or take corporate pronouncements at face value. We need to dig deeper, ask questions, and demand transparency.
We talked about the potato cartel theory, but this goes way beyond just French fries. It's about recognizing that consolidation and potential price manipulation can happen in any sector of the food industry.
Exactly. Think about it. If a few companies gain control over a staple food like potatoes, what's to stop them from doing the same thing with other essential ingredients? Suddenly, your grocery bill is skyrocketing, and you have fewer options for affordable, healthy food.
It's a bit unsettling, to be honest. It makes you wonder, what can we actually do about it? It feels like we're up against these giant corporations with endless resources.
I understand that feeling.
Yeah.
But don't underestimate the power of collective action. Remember those Reddit threads? Those were everyday people sharing their observations, connecting the dots, and sparking a conversation that's now reached a national level.
It's true. Those Redditors were like citizen investigators, piecing together a puzzle that even experts might have missed.
And that's what we need more of: informed consumers who are willing to speak up, share their experiences, and demand better from the companies that control our food supply.
So it's not just about boycotting a specific brand or writing angry letters. It's about becoming more aware of the entire food system from farm to fork.
Absolutely. Educate yourself about where your food comes from, how it's produced,
Yeah.
and who profits from it. Support local farmers and independent businesses whenever possible. Advocate for stronger regulations and policies that promote transparency and fair competition.
It's about making conscious choices that align with our values and using our voices to push for a food system that benefits everyone, not just a select few.
Exactly. And remember, even small actions can have a ripple effect. The more we demand transparency and accountability, the more likely we are to see real change.
I want to challenge our listeners to think about their next trip to the grocery store.
Mm.
Don't just grab your usual bag of frozen fries without considering the bigger picture.
Ask yourself, where did these potatoes come from? Who processed them? How much did they mark up the price? You might be surprised by what you discover.
And if you're feeling motivated, share your findings with others. Start a conversation with your friends, family, or even online. The more we talk about these issues, the more likely we are to find solutions.
Remember, knowledge is power. And when we're empowered, we can create a food system that's fair, sustainable, and delicious.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Spuds, corporate intrigue, and the fight for a better food system.
It's been a pleasure exploring these important issues with you.
Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and stay hungry for knowledge and maybe some homemade fries.
Oh,